All right, so does anyone know what this building is? You're like, I want to look at this building. What's this building? Does anyone know?
It's where the the priests live or something like that.
Yep, so it's called the Deanery. So the Dean of St George's Cathedral, that's St George's Cathedral behind us, with the tiny tower and the emblem, like this, the flag of St George on the roof, the red and the white. That's St George's Cathedral. This is the Deanery. It was the house for the Dean of St George's Cathedral, and it was built in 1857, which is quite early. When you think about the colonial history of Perth, it's quite early on. But what does it remind everyone of? Anyone?
A farmhouse?
A farmhouse, that's a good guess. A little cottage?
Yeah.
Cottage. So the design of this building came out of a book from England. A little book about houses, and they went, oh, that's nice, I'll pick that one. They're going to be like, oh, we're so embarrassed.
Come and talk to us. These are architecture students.
Are they?
They want to know about the building.
Curtin.
Curtin.
Yes.
My partner's an architect, actually.
really?
A heritage
Brilliant.
architect.
Yes, and I worked on these buildings, so I was just telling them about it. As you do, when I was in practice, so just telling them all about the history of this site. Yeah. Fun, so apologies for the story.
And we've got a big service on Monday at 11 a.m. for the
Yeah.
Queen, so you're very welcome to come if that's of interest.
It's actually
to anyone.
lovely, isn't it?
Yeah. Nice to
Thanks,
meet you.
guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's 1857. But there was structures on this site prior to that time. Can you guys see this fence? That's got the air conditioners, right? I designed the fence. Woohoo! One of my jobs.
That's right, you did well.
Woo, I did your job fence. Can you guys? Yeah, can you see? There's a grate. Can anyone see the grate? Yes. So it's just a really bog standard grate, right? Underneath it is an old well. We found an old well. So this whole site was excavated. It used to have the Playhouse Theatre. And all of this site, so this building wasn't here, the Song School building wasn't here, St George's Cathedral was here, the Deanery was here, and they were trying to work out how to create an urban plaza that made sense across this whole, they call it the Treasury Cathedral Precinct. So the Treasury building's on the other side. And so we did a huge amount of excavation. And they called me in the office and said, oh, we found a well. Can we just demolish it? I was like, no. What? We had a look and we went, that's an odd place for a well. Think about it, why would the well be right next to the building? Seems a bit weird. You have your toilets, they're gonna infect your well. So we had a look at old maps, and what did we find? It was probably the well from the jail that stood here before the Deanery, from about 1830. So 1829, British colonial, like settlers, colonists came here. 1830, they built a jail.
And the
out of timber.
roundhouse, similar
They
era,
built the roundhouse
with a well.
but they built a jail out of timber. Why did they build a jail? If anyone's read the lecture and the readings that Justin posted, Michigaru and Yagan, they were fighting against white colonists who set up fences. There's old photos and they've just put little fences everywhere. And so Wajak Noongar people found, were like, what the hell? This is where we would like hunt. This is where we'd go. You're just gonna like put up a fence. So they had a lot of conflict and they would capture and put them in this jail. So this jail probably sat where you guys are standing out of timber. And that well was in the center. So 1830 well hidden under that grate. If we look behind us, this precinct, and we walk through it, is some of the oldest colonial buildings, and the intensive history of Perth is on this site. We'll talk about that more when we go to the other side. So some of the early government buildings were here. There's been a lot of different building structures, a lot of different building history on this site. Come this way, guys.
If you want to talk about sophistication as well, there's different brick bonds. And over there we have, I think, stretcher bond, or actually it isn't stretcher bond, but
No,
this
that's
is a very
Flemish.
clear checker bond.
Is this Checker? Burt Memorial Hall is Flemish.
Flemish, yeah. And stretcher bond is
Yeah.
it's a standard. No, that's Flemish.
So it's interesting, right? So we look at this building, we go, oh, it's so cute, the deanery. It's such a cute little building. Everyone's like, oh, it's so adorable. And we go, oh, it looks sophisticated, but it's not. It's just come out of a pattern book.
But the checker bond may have been added for that reason, to
Yeah.
make it that little bit more than a cottage
Decorative, yeah.
and more decorative,
Yeah.
is what I meant about
Big
that
for a
next.
house of that.
What, sorry?
Big for a house of that here.
Well, I want you guys to think about this too. So we now have the city and there's lots of commercial office buildings, institutional buildings. This street, remember how small Perth was? 1850s? There was probably only several thousand people living here. This was the expensive street to live on. Where St Andrew's Church is was a mansion. It's a big house. There was lots of wealthy houses along this street. St George's Terrace was the most important street in the colony. I want to tell you guys a story, so come in close. So you know how I mentioned that there was that jail on the corner, which we now look at it and we go, oh, it's so beautiful and pristine. How what? There's a bloody history to this site. I was on site, so we're doing this building, but this is one of the ones I worked on for a year. And I came on site, and there's a history to this site. So the great warrior Midgegaroo, so in Yagan Square, you know Yagan Square up near the train station? There's a big statue of Yagan. His father was called Midgegaroo. And Midgegaroo was also a great warrior, if you read the information that Justin's provided. And he was executed somewhere here. About 15 years ago, they thought that Midgegaroo may have been buried on this site, and they couldn't find him. So they did a whole archaeological dig around the deanery to try and find Midgegaroo. They couldn't find any evidence of a grave. They thought maybe he was shot and killed somewhere else. Maybe the records were a bit misleading. There's a sewer line that was put in the 1960s that ran along here. We had to remove it and excavate it and change it, because what ends up having this building we're standing, where you guys are standing, is a car park underneath. So they built a car park. So the Song School is sitting on the top of another building's car park. It's pretty insane. It's the same building to try and work out. Anyway, we pulled up the sewer line. The builders did. And what do you think they found? They found a skull. And they rang us and they're like, hey, we found this skull. We put it in the site office. And we were like, oh my God, don't touch it. You need to call the police. You found a skull. You can't just remove it. So in the 60s, they went, oh well, we'll just put a sewer line. They didn't even care that they were covering up Midgegaroo. We think it's Midgegaroo. We're not entirely sure, but we know it's very old. The dates found. You'll find newspaper articles from when we found it. I was also on site. So that's sort of the bloody history of this site. Pre-colonisation, we find evidence. I was standing on site and I was talking to the builders and I was like doing this in the sand. There's a big sand pit and I was kicking my shoe and I went, oh, there's a bone. What? Found a bone. The builder goes, oh, don't worry, it's just a dolphin bone. Does anyone know why I would have found a dolphin bone when I was standing on the site? Anyone? No? Just dolphins like walked up here and just like yeah. Not quite. It was a camping ground. So we found evidence of dolphins being hunted and then cooked. This was an important camping ground. So how horrible that we have this jail that was put in on what was actually a community meeting ground.
And an elder.
An elder.
Buried.
It was just unceremoniously buried under it, then had a sewer line put on top of it. So when we look at these sites, we see these buildings now, they're really polished. But remember, there's a layers of history embedded, not just in these buildings we see, but also in the ground around us. So that's my kind of thing about what we found on site. This is the Song School building. I worked on this building. It's a strange one. We were given the brief. This is called Burt Memorial Hall. I don't know if you guys can see here. Does anyone have any ideas when that might have been built? Probably like going, I have no idea, Kathryn, stop asking me questions. Anyone have any ideas? It's younger than the cathedral, and the clue's in the name, Burt Memorial Hall. Has anyone heard of the Burt family? No? Burt Law Centre? No? Anyone as a high school student went to the Francis Burt Law Centre? No? So the Burts were one of those really wealthy, influential families around the turn of the century. And they had 2 children who were in World War I, and both of them died. And so the Burts, who were and still are, their descendants still are very influential in the Anglican Church in Perth, donated money to build this hall. When we go past the World Club, if we're not allowed inside because it's a very exclusive club, all by men, a lot of the past presidents are Burts. So even though we like to pretend it's not like that, there's still these influential families that exist throughout Perth that go back generations. So anyway, we were asked to build, so when I was working practice, we were asked to build a choir hall. So St George's Cathedral are well known for their choir, and they were using Burt Hall to perform and practice before they were doing their sung Eucharists and other performances in the cathedral. So this building became we went through several iterations. So anyone doing design will know Chris's favourite thing, iterations. We had lots of different briefs. There was going to be a big office building with a concert hall here, and then they split the brief. So Kerry Hill were asked to do that office building. So that's for the Anglican Archdiocese in Perth. That's their office building. Most expensive office building in WA. Cost 40 million, I think, 20 million. Is that the car park? Car park and the quality of the finish. Per square metre is the most expensive, at the time was the most expensive office building. The curved glass, all of that. And we'll go up that way and we'll talk about why it's been designed that way. So we ended up with this we called it the little beastie. And the idea behind this design was to create a little jewel, we used to call it a little jewel, as a contemporary interpretation of what that choir hall could be like. So we look at these concrete arches, and they're reflective of, can you guys see, I don't know, maybe I can just see from where I am. On top of the tower at St George's Cathedral, you see, they're called lancet windows. They're like this shape, right? And lancet windows are very typical of religious architecture. And so we use that shape as a way to drive the form. I call it a pergola because I like to be hilarious. But this structural shelter that you walk through. And there's a lot of ritual in this building. So you guys, I don't want you guys to all like crowd against the windows, but in that side, that hall where the doors are, is the main choir practice space. And ritualistically, when they do performances, they put on they wear bright red robes. And the idea is that they come out of their choir practice, they get ready in their change rooms. It's a really simple, small building. It's only 100 square meters. There's a choir practice hall, a library for the music, a boys' change room, because there's a lot of boys who sing in the choir, and 2 adult change rooms. And it's then connected to the back of the hall to their toilets. So it's a tiny building, and it's built in the foundations of the cathedral. So technically it was a very difficult building to achieve. We had to, it's called grout inject, we had to support the foundations of the cathedral to then build our building.
Did you have to underpin the
We had to
foundations?
underpin, and so we excavated down.
So that means you actually need to scoop out what's underneath,
Yeah.
support it, and then in sections pour concrete. While it's
So we
still
actually
supported.
grout inject, and then they built 2 levels of brick retaining. So we relied just on grout injection. But we had almost no movement in the cathedral, which was impressive. The concrete so this building is an aberration as well, in the sense that not many buildings are built like that nowadays. It was a result of patronage. Doesn't happen very often. So Lord Cadogan, who owns, I think, half of Mayfair in London, very big wealthy family in the UK, donated $3 million to build this. And they wanted something of architectural merit. So it doesn't happen. For me, this is probably the only time I'll work on something like this in my entire career. So it's kind of like
a folly.
It is
It's a
it is
folly.
almost a folly.
You know,
A beautiful
folly, yeah.
beautiful folly.
Yeah.
Technically, it was very difficult. So we were trying to achieve. So it's about ritual. Sorry, and we.
Do you want to come in?
Oh yes.
Do you want to look?
Oh, it's lovely.
that's lovely.
Oh, normally I do these talks, and we just have to look through the windows. Give me flashbacks because I detailed a lot of this building. Come inside.
It's rubbish.
It's terrible building.
Not very, not the best. Not for singing.
No.
Very dull.
oh, the acoustics are great in here.
And the acoustics are appalling.
Oh, is that?
But
It's meant to
match the cathedral. The acoustics in the cathedral are very bad for singing. Which is why this is all dulled down. You would never have this in a proper song school.
No. So it was acoustically designed to match the cathedral. That was on the brief. So that's so interesting. Yeah.
So you don't want people rehearsing in a pristine space with an amazing acoustic, and then going into a cathedral that's
and then being lit down.
appalling.
Yes, then there would be that.
So
So they used to, I don't know if you remember, they used to practice in Burton Memorial Hall and it had totally different acoustics. So one of the brief requirements was that we acoustically matched the cathedral, which was really technically quite difficult. So that's why we have this panelling. It's meant to diffuse the sound. And this was also a nightmare. This killed me because we were trying to make like hidden doors.
Is that the only one?
No, there's a long other thing. There's some over there as well. And that's why we see this shape curve up here as well. It's designed to reflect and bounce sound, so it deadens the sound. There's also lighting concealed either side of these brass mesh panels. But the idea was the materials, it was meant to be like the inside of a music box. So it had this warm timber with the brass, which we see also in the cathedral. But you can kind of get the impression that we are tucked in the bowels of the cathedral, in the foundation, so that the tower kind of comes down behind where that change room is. There we go. Lighting.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
let me, if the last person comes in, shuts the door firmly, I'll take you up through the Burt
Yeah.
and then out, and then police are here because we've got a plan for
Oh,
Monday.
Fun. Thank you.
Oops, sorry.
Because of the gap in the roots, like to
Oh, my little building.
Bishop, can I just bring a tall group through and up
I
into
did
the
this
Burt?
These are very heavy doors.
Come.
I was stuck in the door.
You probably don't want all this. So I restored this hall as well.
Yeah, right.
Keep following. Hello. Hi, Bishop. Hi. Good to see you. Come on through.
I did the restoration with them.
Are you the tutor?
No, we both
Oh,
are.
you both are. Could you stay at the back and bring the last
good
of the
idea.
students? No, you can come with me.
I'll come with
We'll
you.
keep leading up. Hello.
Thank you for this.
That's all right. I'm sorry it's slightly rushed.
Oh, no, not at all. You never know what it's it's giving me flashbacks of working with the
It's cool. Wonderful.
So I did tell this man that. We got the last scene in the
Which company are you with then?
I worked at the last scene. She might have terrible memories. So, come in, guys. You can see the difference in acoustics.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's much nicer.
Yeah, the singing.
Well, they said it was wonky bricks, really, because the acoustics are badly baked bricks.
Yeah, and they're very soft.
Yeah.
So they're very porous. And so very porous. Yes, yeah. Oh, you guys are lucky. So lucky. I mean,
I'm not going to say anything, really, but just to welcome you and then kick you out. This is the Upper Burt Memorial Hall, named after
the birds.
the Burts, two chaps here. And this is, I think my father.
Yeah, I think so. So this hall was built a lot later, post-World War I, but we can still see some of the detail. I was also involved in the restoration of this hall because I was suffering from punishment and I like to work just on this side. We had a lot of problems with this particular building and it connects through. So all the air conditioning, there's an air conditioning in this building, but the air conditioning in the song school is run off the office building. And we had to try and add all these services and stuff that you need in a new building into an old building. So have a look, we've ended up putting the air conditioning carefully installed grates in this level. And I don't know if you noticed when we walked through Lower Burt Memorial Hall, the ceiling was coffered, so the ceiling went up and down. That was to conceal the air conditioning. Well, how good was that? Oh, you have to.
Yeah, I'm really, really
You can
sorry.
blame me because I did
Yeah, I'm really, really
sorry.
sorry.
I did all the lots.
Oh, did you?
This
Some
building.
of it would have been traumatic, I would think.
Well, this
Major.
building gave me. If I was going to get grey hairs, it would give me grey hairs. I think I issued 500
Oh, it's got
architects.
so many flipping leaks in it for some school.
I was always nervous about that because.
We're having to deal with the homeless challenge.
Yeah. That was always my concern.
Thanks for coming.
No, thank you so much for being so
I'm
accommodating.
sorry, I feel inhospitable having welcomed you.
Do you know what? It's a pleasure to be able to go through.
Oh,
really
it's lovely.
quickly, really
Lovely.
quickly. Thank you so much. And say hi to Bernie.
I will, I shall say hello.
Kathryn.
Kathryn, lovely to meet you.
Yeah, thank you so much. She'll be like,
Was it Monday?
Monday, 11 a.m. Yeah, there's posters everywhere. Hopefully, kind of 9 on.
someone will come. Hey, let's go this way, guys. I might talk about the top of the summer school.
Thank you so much.
All right, bless you.
Thank you.
So guys, let's just crowd here. I'll just stand behind here. All right, guys, come in close. Thank you so much. That was such a treat. You guys are so lucky. So this is, fortunately, I spent like a good. I probably worked at one practice for 7 years. I spent most of that time with this building, the Treasury. So it kind of came that's why I know so much about it. So this is the top of the song school. And I know I used to call it a pergola and people laugh at it. But it kind of is, it's just a structure. Technically it was super tricky. So each of those curved elements in concrete, you can see where they join. They join at the top. So they're almost like little fans. So we looked at different options. We looked at different options to achieve that structure. And so the idea was actually taking these religious forms, think about vaulted architecture, not just of a Western tradition, but going back, to Islamic architecture. That's the inspiration. My boss is actually Greek, so we joke that the brass panels down the bottom have these Greek Orthodox crosses. We thought it was really funny. So this building is about this ritual. So that's the vest, one of the doors. See the door there? It's the the south transept door. When the choir performs, they come in and out of that door. So even though I joke it's a pergola, it's a ritual covered walkway. It's about ritual. This ritual of the robed figures coming through in a pair. So that's why it's split in two. So technically, super complex. We spent 8 months working with the concreter to try and achieve this form. At some point, we thought it was going to be impossible. It was I think I've told some of you, one person in Australia we could find to do it in Adelaide. No one local could achieve this level of technical level of expertise. So each of these shells, we experimented. We even got to a point where we were like, oh my God, what else can we make it of? We can't get it in concrete. So we looked at like fiberglass, which we went, nah, that's shit, we can't do that. That would be terrible. So we finally found these guys in Adelaide called SA Precast, and the guy, Claude, who'd run it, he said, I've been a precaster for like 45 years. And we're like, okay. And he ended up, we had to do so many tests. He ended up falling out with his nephew who also worked for him. They caused this massive family schism. It was insane. Because the nephew's like, oh, we're gonna lose money on it. And Claude's like, I just want to achieve this thing, like the pinnacle of his career. And so they ended up making a steel mold for each of these shells. And there's several of them, because you see the corners are different to the next one along, curved like that. And it's got reinforcement in it. And so it got to the point where the engineer had specified there was too much room on the bottom, there would be no room for the concrete. So we had to keep refining it. We wanted them to be 75 mil thick, because our engineer was Indian. He's like, we can do that, that's fine. In India we can do that. We're like, oh, I don't know if we've got different standards, mate. And then we're like, the builder's like, no, we have to go to 110. We're like, oh, we agonized. And they were like, no, 150. And we're like, no, 110. It was like a bargaining. It was like, no, don't want it too thick. Because we wanted to achieve that thinness of the shell. And so they,
The steel
how high?
fine. Like if you have different grades of steel in there.
I think so. I think it got finer towards the bottom, but they ended up just removing some. So we ended up pouring these shells in Adelaide. So the precaster, he had this falling out with his nephew who wanted to make the molds out of plywood. They collapsed. So he ended up making one out of steel, and he made a prototype. The other technical problem is when you do precast concrete, they have these things called ferrules on them, and they're little plugs. They're called lifting plugs. And they leave, you probably see them on other precast buildings, they leave little circles where you attach the things to lift them up. We didn't want any ferrules on the face, just to make it fun. We're like, nah, we don't want them on the face, because then we had to patch them. So we said to the builder, we want them on the inside face. And they were like, oh, face palm, like, oh my God, you're making this so hard. You can see, if you go through the middle, you'll see the little holes where we've been patched. Would have ruined the effect on the outside. Problem being, right, is they're tulip shaped. So if you're lifting from the back, they want to swing forward. So it's a safety problem. How do you get, we had to ship from Adelaide, so they've got a big truck, they shipped these things over from Adelaide. And the precaster was like, well, how do we install them? You know, you can't manhandle, they're super heavy, right? So he made a lifting rig. He engineered it, he made a little scale model, and he practiced what it would look like to lift it off the bed. When we finally lifted them, they hung perfectly straight, which is insane. And they just slipped. They've got bolts on the bottom, which are hidden by the pavement, and they slid on and bolted. And then they've got a bolt at the top, which then gets patched over. So technically, super crazy. One of the craziest jobs I've ever worked on. The concrete in this building alone cost $1 million. Which is nuts, right?
Kathryn, with all the precast work and all the detailing to get to this point, how long did it actually take to assemble?
I think a few days.
A few days.
Probably less than a week.
I'm so impressed.
Because they lifted so easily off the truck.
So impressive.
Yeah, we'll go down the spiral. We'll have a look at the spiral staircase. We probably won't all go down. There's a lot of us, and we'll head up back this way up past the cathedral. But have a look at this building. It's such a beautiful form. There's lights that illuminate it. Problem being, right, is this leaks. You heard the vergers saying that the top deck leaks. Always a problem with a flat roof. That was not the same. So technically, still not quite resolved. I want you guys to have a look carefully around the base of the cathedral and the Burt Memorial Hall. Can you see this bit here that I'm kicking? Does anyone know what that is? Besides being just a vent. Anyone got an idea? Why would we have put that there?
Let the basement breathe.
Spot on, 100%. It lets the basement breathe. So the Song School has 2 layers. We didn't build right up against the wall. We actually left a gap of about that much to let the basement breathe. But it also takes out discharge air from our air conditioning, just to add to it. So we discharge air conditioning air out of that. So it lets the basement, so we don't have that problem. We're talking about rising damp. It means that the base, because there's a damp proof line and it's further down. Old buildings, I used to use lead or granite, or slate, right? Little slate things. And it's to let the base walls breathe. If we were to butt it right up against, we'd have lots of problems with the basement walls. Right? So I want you guys to go and have a look at the spiral stair. Think about the ritual of these choir people walking up. Look at the shapes that this building is creating. And I want you to think about too, what kind of views we're getting in different directions. This whole precinct, there's a broader strategy of the buildings and where the views are being cut through. So I want you guys to have a look at the spiral stair, and then we'll head over towards that building and we'll loop around. Does that sound good to everyone? Cool, okay.
I'm sorry, but I just can't get over how much it was. Like $1 million.
Explanation for multiple builders across, as I was saying, this is called the Cathedral Treasury Creek. And what used to be here before was the Playhouse Theatre. And then there was a collection, the old City of Perth Library. So there was a lot of different buildings, lots of red brick. It wasn't a very well-loved space. Lots of gates, lots of non-walkways. So when they developed an actual overall urban planning scheme for this like a huge consortium. And by consortium I mean like the cathedral is involved, the City of Perth, private people, the diocese, developers for the Treasury Building, FJM Properties, and what's it called, Mirvac. So Mirvac Finney used to be a company, they then split. Mirvac got the big tower that now has the government building in it. Adrian Finney developed FJM Properties and did the Treasury Buildings. It's a huge consortium. In consultation with lots of other government organisations, so state heritage. And what they did is they went, we need to protect some of the important views of these heritage buildings. And so that's why this building is the shape it is. So it's about protecting these view lines. That's St Andrew's Church. And if I stand back here, I can see the Treasury buildings. There used to be a big building right in front of the Treasury, but you couldn't appreciate that at the start. You used to not be able to appreciate that because a lot of this was congested with buildings. So this is an interesting example of good urban planning, protecting key heritage viewpoints without detracting from it, while still allowing development. So that's why this building ended up in that shape. The idea behind it was the glass would reflect the heritage buildings. I don't know if I like it that much, as a solution. I feel it kind of is meant to reflect, but it's less transparent than the renders they did of it made out. I feel it just looks really shiny.
Yeah, it almost wanted to fade it and soften that reflection so that this is the main thing and that is a reflection, but actually now it looks like you've got the two going on at once, which detracts.
So the idea is it becomes mirrored like and you just see the buildings, but I don't see the reflections, I just see that it's shiny. Especially from this angle. Yeah, and like from this angle you just see the sky, so I don't know if it's that successful.
And poetically, the memory of that building then on that sharp reflection.
Exactly. Let's keep going this way, we'll walk, not get in trouble. So this is the original paintwork we found, and I don't know if you can see. Can you see where the paint's been rubbed away? That was me. Oh, because we have to do paint scrapes, so I did it there, not realising they were going to keep that. So I rubbed that with sandpaper. We're going to go down this way, so follow me to my road. There's lots of safes. We kept the safes. This is a government building, so government checks. Yes. I did everything to do that. Oh, it's good. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's good. So it was kind of
And yes, there is a degree of change.
but it's just, it might be like, oh, section. I won't shout in here, there's lots of people. But have a look at the detail. You see the columns? Same elements repeated. But this was the post office. Look how grand the post office was. I've God, I've got everyone through. Everyone's going to go. Same thing. I had to draw this. We'll stop here for a minute, guys. I'm glad we got to come down this one. I was a bit worried, but I spent too much time talking about that precinct. Wait till everyone catches up. Actually, have we? Oh no, Alina's. No, where is that? Oh, she's there. Hey. I was like, I've lost Alina.
Oh, I'm here. I just wanted to be at the end to make sure.
Take the front around it.
That was quite funny that you did that.
I was like, wait. Alright. So this is like coming close, guys. Otherwise, I have to use my umbrella as a magnifier. So we've got the Treasury, which we just walked through. So government buildings. Other important government buildings we have. Supreme Court. So we can see we've got Government House, Treasury, Supreme Court. Over there is the World Club. World Club is a private members club. Some of the most influential people throughout our history have been members there. It's actually a little bit sexist because only men can join. Still. Only men can join still. Some of the most famous figures in our history have been members there. Something interesting to think about. I went and did some work there. We did a refurbishment.
You were allowed in?
I was allowed in because I was staff. I was allowed to go in. There's photos in the wall of the past presidents of the club. You see the names repeated: Bert, Forrest. I want you to think about the Supreme Court when you're looking at it. Again, that neoclassical architecture. What's it saying? And at the top we've got the royal insignia. It's also on Parliament House, reminding us that again we're a British colony. And then we've got this building. Eva said that it's international style, which is right. So built 1960s for the city of Perth are in that office. It's a really beautiful building. Have a look really carefully. I'll probably leave you guys here, I think, and walk back. So take your time, have a look around. So this is coming off, the same idea from Le Corbusier, the domino. So we've got curtain walls. So we've got this glass that sits on the outside. So think about the difference with the Treasury. We've got these little openings inside between the brick. Ignoring the T's, I would call them the T's, almost like a brise-soleil. We've got, see how the glass is actually sitting on the face of the floors. It forms the wall. It's different. It's a different type of building methodology or construction. And this comes directly out of the modern movement, where people like Le Corbusier were thinking about how do we create buildings for the future. So we went through the Treasury. Do you guys remember we had lots of small brick divided rooms? They call them cell-like. Same with all the other buildings. We saw those commercial buildings that now have shops at the bottom. They're little brick rooms, and each of those rooms, the brick in that room, in the Treasury, we'll find if you go up the levels, a lot of those brick walls are sitting right on top of each other.
They're load-bearing.
They're load-bearing
walls.
So you can't easily move walls around. When we cut openings to develop that building into hotel rooms, we had to put big bits of steel to hold the walls because they were supporting walls above them. This building's different. Again, out of the modern, people like Le Corbusier were thinking, how can I make buildings of the future? How can I make it so that walls can be more flexible? I'm not restricted by where my bricks are and how much brick I have between my windows. So he developed this system where he has these concrete pads, the floor slabs, supported by concrete columns. If you ever see a skyscraper being built, you will see that. Elizabeth Quay, when they were building one, I think it may have been enclosed now, you can see it really clearly. There's a really tall building being built, and often they have a central lift and stair made of concrete. And then they've got
structurally supporting.
Structurally supportive, and then you've got the slabs coming off and columns. And the facade is separate, it's not load bearing.
It can be anything. It can be
anything.
Panels, you'll see a lot of sort of
Glass.
repurposed buildings.
You get glass, you get like that building's glass, you might get solid, like the one behind it looks like Lego. The one is called a Lucabond. These stuck-on panels.
We'll even look at the way that the building is sited. It's on a it's set back, so it's got a foreground. That in itself gives a sense of grand entrance. And then it's a sculpture in the round, so it needs that setback to be appreciated from a distance as a sculpture in the round. And then we've got the podium, which sort of brings us out to connect with the Supreme Court Gardens. So just look at how it's sited as well.
It's very different.
Very different.
Very
in
different.
every way.
And it's kind of an early example of these buildings. So the tower behind us, these towers over here, they come from this architecture of the 60s. Even though they're new buildings, that was built when I worked in the Treasury in 2018, 17, 16, around that end of the teens, 1922. Same methodology. Nothing much has changed.
When you looked at the earlier Bauhaus buildings, and there's still this not wanting to let go of the mass, but then there was the lightness connected, but the mass was always still there. So there was a progression. And even when you look at this building, there's a letting go of some of that mass. We do have some indication of mass in the support structure at the base, but that and also in the sense of the podium, but then and the sun shading device. But then we move even further from that to letting go of even more mass, even though as a whole it looks like a form, but in the lightness of construction in pure curtain wall.
Just pure glass. Interestingly, this building is slightly different. This is why I think it's so loved by Perth. There's a problem. There's a problem if you make just a giant glass building in Perth, right? It's a bit hot.
And we wouldn't have had the mechanical.
Yeah. In the 60s, air conditioning. So you can see that building, the big office building. See the bit in the middle that's all great. That's air conditioning. It's planned. And I find it always laughs. Yeah, always makes me laugh is the pipe coming out the side. I think it's so dodgy.
You can't unsee it.
You can't unsee it. It's like a pimple.
And a bit of tube. Oh, you're talking about that now.
Yeah, the pimple on the side of the building.
Pimple, yeah.
And so think about how much. I know. I don't know. It makes me laugh because they want to say snorkel. It probably has to do with like projecting
keeping it
ventilation.
away from the building.
And so there's this whole thing in architecture where we laugh, and I know it myself from having spent a long time working as a project architect, getting these stuff built, is you get so beholden to your engineers, mostly to do with mechanical. So you know when we went through the Song School and we looked at those beautiful brass arches, do you know how many arguments I had with my mechanical engineer to try and do that? Because the air conditioning diffuses through those brass curved panels. And he's going, and we had this huge argument because I'm going, David, he's going, Kathryn, you need to put more insulation. And I'm like, David, it's already built. I have no space for the insulation. He's like, no, your air conditioning, you need more. And I'm going, I can't fit it in there. It's not, the slab is 500 thick. I'm pretty sure it's okay.
Next year, we're going to have new codes. They're going to be updated, and it's going to be very heavily reliant on sustainability.
Yeah.
Section J is going to be a bit more stringent. Houses are going to cost a lot more, maybe 20, 30 grand more as an average. Because from next year, that's what's going to happen. And WA may not adopt it, but apparently national codes are getting changed. So just as Kathryn said, we do need to abide by these engineers and the codes and the levels of insulation.
But it's an interesting one. So like it's sort of balancing out because you look at these buildings, like that big office building, and they go, oh, the glass is high performance, blah, blah, blah. But effectively, you've got a greenhouse in the middle of Perth, right? It's just glass. So no matter what you do, the sun is going to hit and come through. So their attempt in the 60s was to try and shade. That was their attempt because the air conditioning wasn't as good back then.
It's mixed mode, isn't it? Mixed mode.
And actually, like if you think about air conditioning, so Piccadilly Arcade, which we didn't walk through, but I worked on that a lot. Hilariously, it was one of the first buildings in Perth to have air conditioning. And you go into the basement, and it's got this fan, and no joke, it's 2 meters high, the circle of it, and it's probably about 5 meters long. And it's so big, they couldn't be bothered removing it because there's no point. We just left it there. It's the biggest bit of air conditioning plant I've ever seen in my life, and that was just to service that little building. And it's because the technology has changed. But it means that we're so reliant on technology to solve our design problems for us, right? So we're fighting nature. So some of these buildings we see, like the big, not that I'm picking on Kerry Hill, I think Kerry Hill designed and then Hassel took over, it's very typical of buildings we see around the world, but you're fighting nature. In a 40-degree day, can you imagine how hot that glass gets? So we're heating up the inside of the building to then cool it down with electricity. And so this was their attempt. I don't know how successful it was.
Well, it can't be the same device all the way around because, as we know, north performs differently to south and east and west. However, maybe they used it according to the east and west face and the other.
So something to
face
think
needs
about.
a lot more.
So the buildings we see, even contemporary buildings, have a basis in the history of where we've come from with architecture. So the international style, Le Corbusier, was about this idea of this universal architecture, play with transference. They could apply anywhere. Works probably better in Europe, where it's a bit colder. Doesn't work so well here. So kind of almost debunk this idea that we could have a single universal style.
From memory, they have a strange blind detail in that.
Yep.
To shade off the east and west.
Yep.
I think it has something to do with inside the glass. I can't remember, but there's something.
Right. What time
Look
is
it up.
Layers of history that are happening on these sites. Nothing is as it appears. And it's the same with, like, we talked about buildings, nothing's as it appears. It's the same with sites, same with history. Nothing is always straightforward.
Just keep digging.
You've got to
dig and find out.
Like I said, I found dolphin bones in my shoe.
What Kathryn's done here in Perth is the same thing that I did in Sydney at Circular Quay. Because I worked for Heritage Architects there, so I could do this talk there, but I don't know this talk here. But I used to go and measure all the old buildings that were left abandoned, like the Treasury buildings and whatnot. So
It's been 3 months now. It was hilarious.
yeah, it takes
There was
a long time to
squatters.
find things. It's amazing. It's
There was mushrooms growing in the carpet. It's disgusting.
Oh, and the pigeon poo.
Oh yeah, level
Really
4
bad
of the
for you.
Treasury of the Titles building was this deep in pigeons.
Yeah, it's really bad for you. They used to send the young ones like us out.
I went in, it was okay in winter because it didn't smell that bad. Summer was
I did exactly the same thing over in Sydney on the other side of Australia.
I thought I was going to vomit.
It's like, ugh.
It's bad.
And then you see like evidence of like an old stringer staircase, you can see it in the wall. And
we
it's
had
like,
nicknames. One room was the decapitation room because there was a bit of plasterboard hanging, and my colleague walked under and I went, come back towards me very slowly. This giant 2-meter piece of plasterboard just hanging, pointing at her head. And I was like, oh my God, come back here. So anyway, I think it's worth, if you have time, if you don't have other classes, having a look around these buildings, sketching, looking in detail, and actually looking at the resources Justin posted about the pre-colonial history of this site. Because it's quite important to understand the two. Even though we can't physically see it, it's still here. And it's still important to understand.
If you want to learn how to do absolute white, medium grey, absolute black, this sun shading device is a good one to actually practice on.
Yeah, for your sketching.
Yeah, if you're sketching, and then you can go into sort of the details of that sort of thing.
Oh, well, thanks so much, guys.
Thanks so much, Kathryn. Everyone thank her. That was amazing. Our tour guys.
We were lucky to go inside some of these buildings.
We're very lucky that my group got to cling off her group because I don't know any of this. Well, I know some. But
Does
not
anyone
the
have any
extent.
questions? So this is not the first Anglican cathedral, funnily enough. There was another cathedral that faced this way. This was built in 1880. So there was a cathedral here before. Obviously it didn't last very long. Built in about 1840, only lasted 30, 40 years. Wasn't very well built, so sort of fell down. That's kind of what happened. But it goes to show this site is a long history, as I was saying before, of occupation by government and institutional buildings. So St George's Cathedral, major Anglican focus for the city. Right pride of place on St George's Terrace. Where's the Catholic church? Does anyone know the Catholic cathedral is? Near the hospital. Yeah, sorry, you're like, yeah, near the hospital. So Mary's Cathedral, they'll put near the sick people. So there's something about the religious politics at the time. That's what was happening. A lot of us don't know that a lot about. My grandmother used to always say to me, oh, are they Catholic or Protestant? And I'd be like, what? That was that generation. So it was really important at the time. So that's why the Anglicans ended up pride of place on St George's Terrace. George Temple Pool, have a look at the entry. That curved arch, does it remind you of the printing office? You want to see that over there? I feel like pointing my umbrella. Just like,
Don't fly away.
yeah, very popular. Woo. Have a look, similar shape. So George Temple Pool did this building. So 1890. But can you see all the columns again? And see the same, the cornice with the corbels at the top, those curved things that hold like little brackets. Same sort of detailing we see in other buildings of that era. So the Treasury buildings, which go around the corner, we can walk through there. Was the Treasury, it used to be the major government offices. That's where the seat of government was in WA. All the major administrative tasks were done out of that building. Cabinet sat there before Parliament was built. Remember, Parliament was only built in 1890. The back of the building, that's where the Legislative Assembly was, and only had one house of government. There's a room that you can now hire as a hotel room called the Cabinet Room. That's where they had the cabinet sat, the government cabinet. In the 1920s, it became just Treasury. So some of these buildings date. So the oldest built, which is on the other side of Barrack Street, dates from 1860, 1870. That's it.
Do you know what the oval brooch-shaped? Someone asked what a brooch was the other day when we were at Roundhouse.
Yeah.
Because they were put into the stocks and they got a card
brooch.
to say that they stole a brooch.
Yeah.
And that's brooch-shaped, which was quite a sort of like a pin thing on an aristocratic lady who might have been showing that she was sophisticated in her jewellery. So it's funny that I wonder what's behind that brooch window.
It's funny, so George Temple Pool was quite a sophisticated, he's a sophisticated architect. So unlike some of the other heritage buildings of the 1890s we see, he has a higher level of resolution or design in his buildings. So he's way more considered than some of the other buildings that we see. So he's a lot more accomplished at applying some of those neoclassical stylistic elements to his building than others.
Look at the coffered soffit. Look at the coffered soffit, which has been measured to be exactly in between the coffered soffits. And nowadays, you'd go to Bunnings or Floral and buy 300 or 250 to 300 piece of WeatherTech sheeting by lengths of 2400 or 1200, and that's what you put up outside a standard house.
Totally.
But look at that for a soffit in comparison.
And so it's quite sophisticated. I mean, I know we talk about sophistication in different ways, but this building, the Treasury buildings behind us, maybe we'll keep looking this way. The road there is called Cathedral Avenue. Funnily enough, there's a cathedral there. And so, does anyone know? I'm going to probably jump in a bit earlier than we can show you. So, has anyone heard of the story of Mrs. Dance? No? Probably just me, knowing so much about this site. So when I was a kid, I don't know if anyone else, I used to kind of be like, oh, white people came here at some point, and it was like, just didn't connect that it was actually here. They're like, they came to a spot somewhere like where I've actually been to set up the city. I don't know why I was such a disconnect. I was like, maybe I was just a bit stupid. I was like, what?
I think it's how the history was taught.
How the history was taught,
Particularly when I was young, which was a long time before you. We were given a Year 6 project and it took about, I don't know, 3 weeks. And that's all we learnt about Aboriginal history.
So there's this huge disconnect, right? And so what actually happened was the river came up a lot further up this way. And they sailed here with a ship, and they landed the ship just down where barracks the Jenkins, and they walked up, and this woman called Mrs. Dance cut a tree down, which is somewhere where the Treasury is located, to signify that was the colony. So it happened right here. And so that's why they set out, when they were setting out, you think about how they set out towns, they ignored all the, what was already here, they ignored the wetlands, they went, oh, fill it in, they put a Roman grid, like the straight streets. We see St. George's Terrace, we see Hay Street, we see Murray, they're set up like this. And so they set up these big squares of where government stuff would be. They went, oh, government stuff can go in the middle. And so that's what we see here. So that end building was built first. So where the Como Treasury building is, from that point onwards was built first, 1870. same on Barrack Street. There's two buildings. In the middle was a colonial post office. It's a tiny little building. I think there was one here too. It was a barracks for soldiers. And so there was a jail on the other side. The courthouse was in the back. So they're similar, these buildings, they're just rectangles. On the other side at the back there was two cells. We demolished them, sadly. Some of the oldest parts of that building, and they had a court, a little court. And so as the government grew bigger, their accommodation needs grew bigger. So they expanded this building. The Lands building, this building here. See how it's slightly different? It's all kind of cohesive. It has much more detailing. Again, as the colony got more money. I'll tell you a story. So the roof was put on later. So the Lands building was built first, and then the roof of the buildings down the end, and the second story was actually put on 1880s. Does anyone think it looks a bit French?
Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it was copying that. It's called a mansard roof. I decided to put a mansard roof on it. So it actually had a flat, almost like a flat roof. And you can see where the brick changes. Can everyone see where the brick changes down the very end, where it gets a lot redder? So the reason for that, and this is what we were saying about Flemish style. See how they put the ends of the brick and they turn it? So the reason the brick gets redder is the kilns used to make the bricks out in Midland and Belmont got more sophisticated and they could fire at higher temperatures. So look how pale the bricks are in the cathedral. I don't know if you know the Burgess saying that the sound in the cathedral is really crap. Did you hear him say that? They said it's really dead. That's because the bricks are so soft. They couldn't fire them at really high temperatures. So the sound gets absorbed. And we see that in this building. The lighter the brick, not contemporary bricks, is a bit different, but old bricks, the lighter the brick, the older they are and the softer they are. So you can almost date these buildings by how light the bricks are. You can see the difference between the titles, which is 1890, and the end of that building. I think it was I can't remember what it was called. Too many buildings, I forgot. The original building under the second story level. So when the mansard roofs in the 60s, they turned it into tile. And so part of my job when I was working I'd worked on the Treasury too. This is just a story of my life. It's just like an autobiography of architecture work. When I was working on this building, we did the facade restoration. So all the, that concrete render, you see the grey stuff, it was painted in an attempt to protect it back in the 60s. All it did is drive moisture into it and cause damage. So we stripped off. I think that cost $500,000 to strip the paint off the brickwork. No, sandblasting is too damaging.
Yeah.
So you use a steam.
Wow. Oh,
Yep.
okay.
It's very gentle procedure. The roof, we reinstated the slate, original slate. The lace work, can you see the black stuff on the top? It's very particular of that era. We couldn't find it, gone. And I found on a really old drawing a little reference to a foundry in Scotland. And I found the pattern book from 1890s and I replicated it. So that lacework, you can go, Kathryn did that. That was me. Highlight of my life. At the Song School.
I think Song School, yes.
Found a one tiny reference in the drawing and we're able to replicate all the ornate lacework you see. But it's funny, people go, oh, it's so decorative, these buildings. Like, you know, you're saying about the, the post office. Oh, they look so decorative. But when you break it apart, it's a bit like going to IKEA and going shopping. So they had this book. I've got it, I think it's in the office I used to work at. I ordered a copy from Scotland. Scottish Heritage sent it to me. I think it cost them more to send it to me than I paid for it, because I think it's cheap. And it's this book, and it's literally got everything. It's got lights, it's got lacework, it's got balustrade.
Catalogue.
It's a catalogue.
Yeah.
And so what they did is if you break these buildings apart, it's just like a picked part you want for your building. So the lacework is so beautiful and ornamental, but it's literally, I think it's like number 136 out of all the different options you can have.
And what about the candelabra up there?
Yep, that's the same. That's in the pattern book.
So it went with the roof of that era.
Yep.
Wow.
And we put it back. So see that really decorative lacework with the really ornate. I had to detail that, and we're trying to work out how to fix it. And my boss, I'm standing there pretending to be one of those spires, so we could work out how much fixing to put on the bottom. But they're made of aluminium. We replicated them in aluminium because it's lighter. Yeah. Crazy, hey?
Yeah.
So I want you guys, we're kind of probably running out of time, and I've got a thesis student to meet. So I was hoping to take us through down past the Supreme Court. So maybe, what time is it? Do you know?
I don't know.